perhaps our city's most famous landmark. And in the background, the St. Clair County Courthouse, for Belleville is the county seat. Fluttering above us is the city's flag. Its black, yellow, green, and white represent, respectively, our area's rich soil, mineral wealth, abundant agriculture, and cultural diversity, while the post horn symbolizes Belleville's old world heritage. These things illustrate our city's past, present, and future. I'm Norm Greenberg, and I'll be your host as we explore Belleville's fascinating history, 175 years of progress. Belleville is located near the center of St. Clair County at 400 to 700 feet above sea level. We occupy the highlands east of the Mississippi River bluffs, where rich farmland spreads out over rolling countryside. Just beneath the ground lay vast coal fields, which help power our country's factories. We have the distinction of being situated in one of our nation's major crossroads for commerce and the world's breadbasket. We experience all four seasons and enjoy a happy medium between the cold northern and hot southern climates. Indeed, we have a choice location in America. Unlike other symmetrically proportioned cities, Belleville has an unusual oblong shape caused by continuous growth along its lengthy West Main Street, creating a city 10 miles long by only 4 miles at its widest. Belleville officially began on March the 10th, 1814. However, our story must go further back in time, since our city evolved from the history of the land and of St. Clair County. Thousands of years ago, an ancient people we collectively call Indians migrated from Siberia to Alaska by crossing a then-existing land bridge where the Bering Strait is today. Over countless generations, tribes followed various river systems that eventually transported them to the Mississippi River Valley. It was at the American Bottoms, an 85-mile-long floodplain on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, that early settlements began to flourish. The rich soil for farming and bountiful game invited permanent communities. Archaeologists have established that at least 5 periods of development existed: the Paleo, the Archaic, the Woodland, the Mississippian, and the Historic. Around 900 AD, the early Mississippian culture began building large earthen mounds, and by 1150 AD, a magnificent empire was created in the American Bottoms. It became the center of trade and culture for this Mississippian period. By 1500 AD, this site was abandoned, and the identity of these mound builders is still a mystery. Today, Cahokia Mounds is the only prehistoric Indian city north of Mexico, and the remains of the principal city are preserved at the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, located 12 miles northwest of Belleville. Later, during the historic period, the tribes of the Illinois Confederacy settled in this area. They were the Cahokia, from whom the mounds were named, the Kaskaskia, the Peoria, the Michigami, and the Tamaroa. The name Illinois is a French derivation of the Algonquin Indian word meaning perfect and accomplished men. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered and claimed the Americas, thus making these Indians subjects of Spain. Hernando de Soto further established Spanish rule by exploring the southeast portion of North America in 1541. He and his conquistadors were probably the first Europeans to see and cross the Mississippi River. However, it would not be Spain, but France, which would colonize the American Bottoms. In 1673, Father Jacques Marquette, a missionary, and Louis Joliet, a trader, boated from Canada down the Mississippi River looking for a route to Asia. Along the way, they camped in the vicinity of the future site of Cahokia, Illinois. By 1699, Jesuit priests had established a mission at Cahokia, thus making it the first permanent European settlement in our area. Afterwards, the French built Fort Deschartres and Fort Kaskaskia to protect and assist surrounding settlements. David Keene, an instructor of anthropology at Loyola University, explains the French presence in the American Bottoms.
The American Bottoms have always been an important agricultural center in the modern world and in modern times. As early as the 1700s, the French government had sent a number of French colonists to the Illinois country to establish villages as far away as Cahokia to the north and Kaskaskia to the south. Along with Cahokia and Kaskaskia, they developed other villages in the American Bottoms area where we're sitting right now, the Fort de Chartres area. Just off, away from the fort, you have three main villages, the village of Chartres, the village of Prairie de Rocher, and the village of Saint Philippe. All these villages send grain from here, from this region, down the Mississippi River to New Orleans and into the Caribbean in order to be used to feed the slaves working the sugar plantations. Sugar was an important commodity sent to France in order to trade with other European nations. If it wasn't for the Illinois country and the production of grain as early as the 1730s and 40s, most of the development of mercantile France would never have taken place.
In general, the French settlers were friendly and lived peacefully among the Indian tribes. After the signing of the Treaty of Paris, ending the 7 Years' War in Europe, France rendered claims to the American Bottoms to England in 1763. The English colonists were not given to fraternizing with the Indians as had the French, and harsh British rule soon made the Indians hostile. However, British control of the American Bottoms was brief. During the American Revolution, George Rogers Clark's army captured Cahokia without a shot on July 4th, 1778, and the settlers quickly sided with this new nation. Looking back, we can see how the Indians, the Spanish, the French, and the English all have played an important role in our county's history. But now our area was under the control of a new government. In 1787, General Arthur St. Clair, after whom our county is named, was appointed governor of the Northwest Territory. While visiting Cahokia, he issued on April 27, 1790, a proclamation creating St. Clair County, with Cahokia selected as the county seat. The original courthouse still exists, and it is a federally designated National Historic Landmark. St. Clair County was the first of 102 counties in Illinois and originally covered all of Illinois and additional territory. Eventually, it would be divided, thereby giving St. Clair the nickname Mother of Counties. Indian problems did not end with American rule. Early settlers were constantly on guard against raiding parties. But by 1800, the Indian tribes had been forced out of St. Clair County, and in their place came hundreds of pioneers from Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, and the Carolinas. These early Americans mainly settled on farms in the highlands east of the American Bottoms. As the population among the Highlanders grew, it became necessary to select a more centralized location to serve as county seat. George Blair immigrated to St. Clair County in 1796, and by 1802 he had purchased a 200-acre farm. He chose to build his log home on an old Indian campsite where an excellent source of spring water existed. Today, this site is located on the corner of South Illinois and West Lincoln Streets in Belleville. On December 1813, the legislature of the Illinois Territory appointed 7 commissioners to find a new location for the county seat. Blair invited the commissioners to inspect his property, and on March the 10th, 1814, they agreed and fixed the new county seat on his farm. Blair donated 1 acre of land to be used as the public square. At the time, it was a cornfield and was approximately 140 yards northwest from his cabin. Blair also relinquished 25 acres surrounding the public square and designated every 5th lot to be used for the benefit of the county. Blair's farm was originally known as Compton Hill, but he chose to rename this site Belleville, a French name meaning beautiful city. John Reynolds, who served as 4th governor of Illinois and was an early Belleville historian, left us this description of George Blair.
The first time I saw Mr. Blair was in the fall of 1806, and I was well acquainted with him from that time until his death. Mr. Blair was a man of medium size and middle age in 1814 and possessed nothing attractive about him. Mr. Blair, like many other persons, had a natural and an inborn hatred to work and scarcely ever permitted his peace of mind to be disturbed by any kind of labor whatever.
Not a very flattering portrait of the father of our city. Yet Blair must have been a man with a vision. Wealth and fame would be his once this new county seat blossomed from the heart of what was then the world's largest county. His fortunes began with a $6 payment to haul chairs, benches, and tables from the old courthouse in Cahokia to his log cabin, which would serve as the temporary courthouse. That summer of 1814, Etienne Pensineau, a French-Canadian, was contracted to build a two-story, unpainted frame courthouse in the center of the public square. By September of 1817, it was completed, and for its day, quite impressive. Today, our Veterans Memorial Fountain graces this spot. That same summer, Blair appointed John Messenger to survey Belleville. Messenger was an excellent choice. He had surveyed most of St. Clair County and, in fact, much of the future state of Illinois. Today, he's buried in Messenger Cemetery off Old Collinsville Road. This area still bears his farm's name, Clinton Hill. From the beginning, the public square was the center of civic and commercial activity, and the early history of our city revolved around it. Besides a new courthouse, the square acquired a market house, a log jail, and a pillory. 2 walnut trees saved the county the cost of erecting whipping posts. However, by 1833, an enlightened state legislature banned both the pillory and the whipping post. The War of 1812 depressed both our nation's and Belleville's economy. George Blair's dreams crumbled, and he sold his land holdings to Etienne Pensineau in 1816. Pensineau was a well-to-do dry goods store operator, but he too sold out just 1 year later to Ninian Edwards. Edwards, who served as territorial governor and 3rd governor of Illinois, was a pivotal figure in Belleville's early history. Through his talents and enterprise, our city finally grew. In addition to Ninian Edwards' efforts, the construction of the Wilkinson and Ringgold flour mill on South High Street greatly advanced Belleville's status as a city with a future. Built in 1819, the original mill was powered by oxen walking on an inclined wheel. Around 1826, this mill was converted over to steam power shortly after Thomas Harrison purchased it, thus giving Belleville the distinction of having the first steam mill in Illinois. Today, this site is memorialized with a bronze plaque and is known as Ox Hill. Harrison would later move the mill in 1836 to Richland Creek, where the water supply was more abundant. Belleville was manufacturing bricks by 1818, the same year Illinois became a state. Early brickmaking, which was an important industry for Belleville, accounts for the many fine historic brick homes that exist in Belleville today. The Emma Kunz House Museum, located at 602 Fulton Street, survives as Illinois' oldest Greek Revival-style brick home. The following year, in the spring of 1819, Belleville was granted a village charter from the new state of Illinois. One of Belleville's most notorious events occurred on February the 8th, 1819, when a sham duel was fought over a horse. This tragic event took place near West A and North 2nd Streets. The principals, Alphonso C. Stewart and Timothy Bennett, were to face each other with unloaded rifles. But Bennett secretly loaded his gun and fired before the signal was given. Stewart died immediately. Bennett was jailed, but soon escaped. 2 years later, he was captured, tried, and hung before a large crowd. In 1825, William Fowler opened the first coal mine in Belleville. With its superior burning capacity, coal replaced wood as fuel for Belleville's growing industries, as well as the nation's. Minna Morris, a local historian, explains why coal was a vital link in Belleville's progress.
The areas that were most active in developing coal were those in the St. Clair County region, especially in West Belleville. The major purchasers of this coal were the industrialists and the commercial establishments of St. Louis. However, Belleville itself used up a goodly amount of its own coal because it could save on transportation costs by using coal mined without transportation costs and bringing the raw materials to Belleville. The result of this, of course, was that Belleville became a highly industrialized and quite urbanized town quite early.
Belleville's growth created a need for a new courthouse, and by 1831, construction was completed on a two-story brick building. This courthouse also stood in the middle of the square and was the fourth seat of justice in St. Clair County. The early 1830s ushered in the first major wave of German immigrants into this area. They were well-educated and talented newcomers who had fled Germany due to political and social persecutions. Some of these intellectuals settled on farms in and around Belleville. And since they could speak Latin perhaps better than they could plow a straight furrow, they were collectively called the Latin farmers. Several of these Germans would become prominent in Belleville's history and development, and their influence is still felt today. In the year 1834, the cook stove was introduced. This modern convenience greatly improved meal preparations as opposed to cooking in the fireplace. The demand quickly exceeded the supply, and Belleville stove foundries began producing them in large quantities. Eventually, Belleville became the stove capital of the world. Linda Hay, past president of the St. Clair County Historical Society, describes living conditions in the 1830s.
The person who built this home would probably be what we consider an upper middle class person. But no matter how much money you had or didn't have during 1830s, there were certain limitations to your lifestyle. There was no indoor plumbing, and of course this inconvenienced members of the family at all times of the night and day. There was also no electricity, which meant that lighting provided during the evening's hours was either by the fireplaces, candles, whale oil lamps, and other types of lamps. The third limitation was that there was no heating or air conditioning within the home. In the wintertime, people wore heavy woolen clothing to bundle up against the elements and gathered around the fireplace or the cook stove for heat. During the summer, the shutters were used to provide some privacy, but also at the same time let air ventilate within the house. The fourth limitation was the lack of a refrigerator. This created an endless amount of time having to be spent on preserving and canning food. Belleville in 1830 may have been considered by some in the backwoods, but it was never out of the mainstream of the society at large during that period of time.
In the summer of 1836, a group of Latin farmers met at the home of Dr. Anton Schott. From this gathering developed the St. Clair County Library Association, which evolved into our present Belleville Public Library. This association predates the Illinois State Library by 3 years, making the Belleville Public Library the oldest in Illinois. Today, this library still preserves many of the original books collected by these men. With industries flourishing in Belleville, railroads began to emerge. At first, they were primitive, horse-drawn affairs, which later were replaced by steam engines, and soon railroad lines expanded our city's markets. Oliver D. Joseph, a longtime railroad enthusiast, explains the impact the trains had on Belleville.
100 years ago, railways developed our nation. Cities were either located along rivers or along the rail lines that were first being built, because they were the only means of transporting people and goods. Belleville today is served by 3 major rail lines: the Illinois Central, the Southern, and the L&N. On this particular location, 100 years ago, the Louisville, Evansville, and St. Louis Railway backed passenger trains into the depot. There was a ticket office, a business office, a freight depot, and surprisingly, a 4-stall roundhouse that serviced the steam locomotives, and even shops to rebuild the wooden passenger cars.
For a few hours in April 1842, the Mansion House hosted the great English novelist Charles Dickens. He and his party made a brief stopover while on their way to the Looking Glass Prairie near Lebanon, Illinois. In his book, American Notes, he referred to Mansion House, Belleville's finest hotel at the time, as
the old, shambling, low-roofed outhouse, half cowshed and half kitchen.
As to Belleville,
a small collection of wooden houses huddled together in the very heart of bush and swamp, its main street a forest path nearly knee-deep in mud and slime.
Despite Mr. Dickens' lack of appreciation for our little town's charm, his son, Alfred Tennyson Dickens, made a courtesy visit to Belleville in 1911. Mansion House would be razed in 1919, and the Lincoln Theater presently occupies this momentous site. In the fall of 1843, the historic Harrison Mill was destroyed by fire, but it was quickly rebuilt the following year. This mill was very important to Belleville's reputation for producing quality flour. In 1917, J.F. Imms Milling Company purchased this mill and continued serving our city well into the 20th century. By the mid-1840s, Belleville's population was almost 2,000, and the people were complaining about the poor roads, dust bowls during the dry season, bottomless mud holes when it rained. Thus, in 1846, the first macadamized road in Illinois was built from Belleville to St. Louis. This road was commonly called Rock Road, being a mixture of rock and tar. And in 1906, it was officially named West Main Street. Also, mass communications made major advances when telegraph wires were strung up between Belleville and St. Louis in 1847. Since Belleville's founding, education has never been neglected. Usually, local churches or private institutions provided basic education. However, in October 1848, Belleville established its first public school system. It was to be several years later, in 1855, that public schools became the law in Illinois. Belleville can be proud that 3 of its citizens were important figures in the development of our cities and Illinois' early educational systems. They were James P. Slade and Henry Robb, who both became state superintendents of public instruction, and George Bunson, who was a member of the State Board of Education and promoted better training for teachers. The Harrison Machine Works was an important manufacturing company of steam engines and threshing machines for both Belleville and the Midwest. It was established in 1848, and its threshers were famous throughout the country, even into Mexico. It was originally located on 6 acres of land, now owned and occupied by St. Elizabeth's Hospital. With improved highways, railroads, vast coal fields, and an industrious population, Belleville was emerging as the leading city in southern Illinois. By the 1850s, upper middle-class homes were common. An excellent example is the St. Clair County Historical Society Museum on East Washington Street. Moritz Dobschutz, a successful businessman from Germany, was the original owner. Robert Gensch, a history teacher, speaking from the parlor of this fine home, discussed the second wave of German immigration into Belleville and the economic boom that followed.
In 1848, a series of revolutions occurred in Germany, many of which were unsuccessful. As a result of the lack of success in these revolutions, many Germans of upper-class values and education fled Germany and came to the United States. Belleville was fortunate that it received a large number of these people in the early 1850s. Lots of them became active in politics. Many of them were businessmen. Many of them were involved in education. We were fortunate that these people had money to invest, and many of them went into small businesses. As a result of their investments in businesses and the carryover of some of the businesses which they brought from Germany, Belleville goes through a boom period in the 1850s and 60s with many small businesses springing up. And of course, Belleville exported lots of things from this area to other communities throughout the United States.
In 1850, Belleville was granted a city charter by the state of Illinois, and the first mayor was Theodore Kraft. Earlier, Kraft had been sent from Germany to America by his uncle, Theodore Erasmus Hilgard, to locate a suitable home for the family. He bought a large farm on the west side of Richland Creek, and in time, from this site emerged West Belleville, complete with its own residential and commercial establishments. The original public square still exists at West Main and 11th Street. By 1861, West Belleville was incorporated and had a population of 600. Belleville's growing German population was keenly interested in the promotion of mental and physical health, as well as cultural refinement. In the early 1850s, two important societies were created: the Turnverein, later called the Turner Society, and the Sangerbund. The Turnverein was a gymnastics club, while the Sangerbund was a singing society. These clubs, as well as other societies like the Liederkranz, were most successful. During the years preceding the Civil War, the question of slavery was a hotly debated issue. Lyman Trumbull, who resided in Belleville during his formative years in politics, became the father of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Belleville also was the home of Illinois' first Republican governor, William H. Bissell, who was elected in 1856 with the assistance of Abraham Lincoln. Belleville had been strongly Democratic, but the citizens were switching to the new Republican Party because of that party's anti-slavery position. While campaigning for Bissell in Belleville, Lincoln was invited to speak to a large crowd from the home of John Shale, a local and state politician. Today, the Central Junior High School stands where Shale's home once was. Likewise, Governor Bissell's home originally stood where the Belleville Public Library is today. In 1858, Belleville resident Philip Gundlach invented the Gundlach forced feed grain drill, which revolutionized farming throughout the world. In fact, this drill is ranked along with the threshing machine and McCormick reaper as a major technological innovation in agriculture. St. Clair County was in need of a newer and larger courthouse. Therefore, by 1859, the foundation for the fourth courthouse in Belleville was laid out on the site of our present seat of justice. Its classic Greek Revival style made it one of the most beautiful buildings in Illinois. Twice, in 1903 and 1908, it was enlarged to provide continuing service well into the 20th century. Gustavus Philipp Kerner is perhaps Belleville's most important citizen. Born in Germany, he immigrated to Belleville in the early 1830s with other Latin farmers. He began his career as a lawyer active in local politics, and eventually was promoted to a justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, lieutenant governor of Illinois, and finally United States minister to Spain. Kerner was a close confidant to Abraham Lincoln and was an important figure in Lincoln's election to the presidency. After Lincoln's assassination, Kerner would have the sad duty of being one of the pallbearers at the funeral. Gustavus Kerner's home still stands in Belleville's historic district off of Auburn Street. Here, Kerner retired to write his memoirs and to die at the age of 86. During the Civil War, Belleville men enlisted when Lincoln requested volunteers to help the Union. Soon after, Camp Kerner, a training camp named after Gustavus Kerner, was established at the old fairgrounds. Many of these soldiers would march with General Sherman, while others fought at Gettysburg. On May the 8th, 1861, Captain Ulysses S. Grant visited Belleville to inspect the troops and was pleased by their drilling. Through Grant's efforts, the 22nd Infantry was organized and fought with him in the Battle of Belmont, an action which was decisive in maintaining Missouri as a Union state. Following the Civil War, the Belleville Oil Works was established in 1866. Jacob Brocius invented a cold press operation unique to the Midwest that produced the finest table oils from castor, linseed, hickory, and pecan nuts. By 1876, Brocius' wealth created the magnificent Kronthal House, patterned after a castle in Kronberg, Germany. This home had the first indoor plumbing and the first steam heating in Belleville. Today, Union Methodist Church occupies the Brocius homestead. By the early 1870s, the horse-drawn streetcar was in operation. More paved streets and sidewalks were utilized, and the Eads Bridge, the first traffic and railroad bridge to cross the Mississippi River, was completed. This bridge was very important in stimulating business and commerce between St. Louis and Illinois. A footnote, James B. Eads, the designer of the bridge, had received his early education in Belleville. In 1875, Belleville led the way for preschooling in America by organizing the Kindergarten Association, which by 1915 was officially incorporated into the Belleville public school system. Today, the Belleville Philharmonic Society resides in that original kindergarten building on North Jackson Street. This musical society was created in 1866 and is the second oldest continuously performing orchestra in the nation, with only the New York Philharmonic predating it. 3 Franciscan sisters from Münster, Germany started a small hospital in Belleville. Prior to their efforts, Belleville had no hospital except for the county poorhouse, which served indigent persons. From these sisters' efforts came the foundations for St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The original hospital was a 3-story brick building erected in 1881. Over the years, it evolved into the present modern facility. A momentous event took place on April 21st, 1881, when West Belleville officially merged with Belleville, thus creating one unified city. Despite rain, celebrations continued into the night, highlighted by a parade beginning at Huff's Garden, a popular recreation center off South 11th Street, and extending to the public square. About this time, Belleville began to expand westwardly due to coal mining operations along West Main Street and continuing down towards the bluffs. 1882 was a banner year for our city when the Belleville Telephone Company began service out of the Penn Building located on the northeast corner of the square. Today, Boatman's Bank stands on this site. That same year, electric streetlights were installed, replacing the gas lights that had been in service since 1856. And Romeiser's department store became the first business in Belleville to utilize electric lighting. Early in Belleville's history, both English and German newspapers were widely read. Today's Belleville News-Democrat was created in 1883 with the union of the Weekly Democrat and the Daily News. By 1958, the Belleville Daily Advocate, whose roots go back to the St. Clair Gazette of 1833, also became part of the Belleville News-Democrat. In addition, Belleville had several successful German newspapers throughout its history, but anti-German sentiments during World War I forced their demise. In 1886, the village of Swansea, located along Belleville's northern boundaries, was created. Elaine Linsnick, who wrote a history of Swansea for that city's 1986 centennial, discussed why Swansea desired its own identity.
The building behind me was once the St. Clair County Hospital, part of the Poor Farm complex established by St. Clair County in 1844. When the village of New Swansea was incorporated in 1886, it became part of that community. The village of New Swansea was incorporated by a group of businessmen and people who lived in the area, probably to block annexation of the area into Belleville. My feeling is that they probably wanted to escape higher taxes. One of the prime movers in the incorporation was Philip Gunlock, whose Gunlock Drill Works was then located in the newly incorporated community. Why they came up with the name New Swansea has never really been established. The tradition is that one of the bricklayers at the Itner Brickworks was of Welsh extraction and that he was the one who suggested the name. The post office, a few years later, arbitrarily dropped the first word, and from then on it was just known as Swansea.
A new city hall was constructed on the corner of South Illinois and West Washington in 1892. The second floor was reserved for the public library. However, in 1916, a permanent library on East Washington Street was dedicated as the Carnegie Library, since the Andrew Carnegie Corporation lent financial support. Later, it would be commonly called the Belleville Public Library. Belleville saw its first streetcar in 1898, and the public square became a busy crossroads for their varied destinations. The following year, 1899, for the first time, automobiles were seen on the streets of Belleville. These early cars created much excitement, but few believed that in the near future, the horse and buggy would be obsolete. By the turn of the century, Belleville was a robust community. Industries were booming. Transportation via improved roads and railways increased commerce, and new exciting conveniences were becoming commonplace, such as electricity, indoor plumbing and heating, and the telephone. Soon, St. Louis and the Metro East would be preparing for the spectacular St. Louis World's Fair of 1904. And that same year, the public square was surfaced with brick, a great improvement over the bumpy cedar block pavement and mud holes of the past. Since Belleville's founding in 1814, our city was always dependent on deep wells and various reservoir systems to supply water. But by 1912, Belleville's needs were secured. A long-standing dream of tapping into the inexhaustible Mississippi River was achieved when a water main was connected to the East St. Louis Water Company system. That same year, a terrible fire destroyed St. Peter's Cathedral, leaving only the walls and spires standing. Erected during the Civil War in 1863, this historic cathedral would be quickly rebuilt the following year. Mark Westhoff, the immediate past president of the St. Clair County Historical Society, talked about the important role St. Peter's Cathedral and religion had on Belleville's development.
The religious influence on this area emanates down from Quebec into Cahokia, Illinois, as early as 1694. The missionaries in that area established a mission there, and from there reached out into the American Bottoms, which includes Belleville, Illinois. At the same basic period, a little later than that, the Baptists arrived in the area and were basically served by circuit riders. The same thing applied to the Methodist Episcopal Church, who arrived in the surrounding area and began serving their people by circuit riders. Quickly after that, though, very quickly after that, congregations were established both for the Catholics, the Baptists, and the Methodists, and out of that rose a major influence on the area by these religions. You can see just by the mere edifice of the cathedral itself the importance that Catholicism took on in the area merely by its size and by its grandiose architecture. You can see that there was a great deal of interest here in religion and the growth of it. All of those things combined to attract more people into the area, because obviously the Catholics from Germany and France and the others who settled in the area, the other religions who settled in the area, wrote back to their homes explaining what a wonderful area this was, which brought in more people. When you stop and think of the importance of a cathedral in a town, that very happening raised Belleville to the same stature as Rome, Paris, Cologne, Berlin. And so you have to understand that religion in this area has been very, very important, even to the point where the mother church of the Catholic Diocese of Belleville, which is for all of southern Illinois, is established in the city of Belleville. And the building we're standing in itself continued on as a cathedral until 1912, when it burnt to the four walls. And again, we can understand the importance of religion to the people here, because out of those ashes of 1912, they raised this gorgeous edifice, which is the largest cathedral in the state of Illinois.
When March the 10th, 1914 arrived, Belleville held a large celebration for its 100th birthday. Later that year, a week in September was set aside as Centennial Week, in which parades and other activities were held. Belleville has endured its share of disasters, but the flood of 1915 was one of the worst. Richland Creek overflowed its banks, and the rampaging waters flooded the nearby power plant, thus leaving Belleville literally in the dark. Rowboats were needed to rescue people from their homes, and the city was divided by the high waters. Flooding at Richland Creek was a constant problem, but it would be years before steps were taken to remedy it. With increasing automobile traffic, Belleville began paving Main Street with concrete in 1916. At the time, this project was the largest single improvement undertaken by any Southern Illinois community. Soon, out-of-date plank roads and their toll booths gave way to smooth concrete highways. As Belleville's population grew, a need for a larger and newer high school developed. A 26-acre site on the west end of Belleville, known as Christie Place, was chosen. Construction began in 1915, and the following year, Belleville Township High School was in operation. Over the years, an auditorium, a gymnasium, and additional classrooms were added. At a later time, the old Central High School was demolished, and by 1920, Central Junior High School occupied its site. Belleville's large German population was a patriotic, liberty-loving people who supported the Union's cause during the Civil War. Their industriousness and culture had dominated Belleville's development, and throughout Belleville it was common for German to be spoken, read, and taught. However, World War I brought an end to many German influences. Elmer McCarran, a World War I veteran and commander of Barracks 536, remembers the mood in Belleville during this troubled period.
Well, they taught German in all the schools, and then after the war, they dropped all the German teaching in all the schools, and the people were never resented us, even though it's a German community. They went along with it okay. I found no resentment at all, though there was some, no doubt.
As a result of World War I and aviation's development, Scott Field was created. In 1917, the War Department leased 640 acres in the Shiloh Valley Township outside of Belleville in order to train airplane pilots. This new facility was named after Corporal Frank S. Scott, who was the first enlisted man to die in an aircraft mishap. Following the war, the Army converted Scott Field into the nation's headquarters for training airship pilots and balloon observers. During World War II, this air base became the training center for radio operators. After the war, Scott Field officially became Scott Air Force Base. Over the years, Belleville has benefited greatly from Scott Air Force Base as it developed into today's modern military facility, home for 2 major air commands, plus numerous tenant organizations. The brewery industry was an important part of Belleville's economy. Breweries such as Washington, Star, and Stag were famous throughout America. However, on July 1st, 1919, the 18th Amendment went into effect, and St. Clair County, as well as the rest of the country, went dry, until 1933, when this amendment was repealed. Joe Adam, a retired city editor for the Belleville News-Democrat, remembers this event.
That killed it. As beer killed both of them here. And as soon as Prohibition was repealed, my Stag was right prepared for it. They knew it was coming, and they were ready to go right away. Right after Prohibition, right after President Roosevelt signed the law allowing beer, legalizing beer, they were ready to go. Start. Really took several years before it got started up after that.
In 1902, Christian Ebsen, father of film and television star Buddy Ebsen, purchased Nispel's Lake, located in Star Brewery Park, and created Ebsen's Natatorium, a popular spot for swimming. Later, in 1925, the Turner Society bought this lake and built the modern Turner swimming pool. In recent years, this pool has been completely renovated and is known today as the Belleville Swimming Pool. Also, in late 1923, the Turner Society began constructing the Turner Building on North 1st and West A Streets. By 1959, the YMCA gained ownership of this building, and shortly thereafter, the Turner Society became inactive, thus ending over 100 years of community service. Belleville was struggling with Prohibition during the 20s when another economic catastrophe happened. In 1929, the bottom fell out of the stock market and plunged our nation into a massive depression. Like many other industrial cities in America, Belleville had to cope with hardships.
We had a lot of unemployed people at that time, and a lot of fellows were only working part-time. That we didn't have the welfare system we got now. We didn't have Social Security. It was pretty tough. It really hurt. It hurt all segments of it. There were a lot of layoffs in the industries that were left. Farmers suffered heavily.
Belleville has had its share of floods, blizzards, and other natural disasters, but the tornado of 1938 still haunts our city's memory. On March 15th at 4:54 p.m., a tornado roared through Belleville, leaving 10 people dead and causing much destruction. It destroyed Union School at South 29th Street and continued up North 28th Street, smashing everything in its path. Dolores Beeser is a survivor of this tragic event and recalls that day.
Quite suddenly, it got real dark and kind of a greenish, yellowish, the sky looked terrible. And when we looked out of the back, I was over at my mother's at 2925 West Main, and we looked at the back, we could see this funnel coming and heard the noise of it sounded like the diesels. They had just started diesels, and it sounded like a lot of trains coming. And where Thurman's filling station was, where now the convenience store is, it was demolished. But my dad, in the meantime, had stopped at Hargrave's, which was across the street at 27, and he went in to tell the people lay on the floor that there was a terrific storm coming. And they don't know if he got in the car, whether he was in the car or out of the car. But anyway, his car was found on the roof of the filling station, and his body was found on 28th Street. And then he went around the front of our place and came down 30th and took our back porch completely off. And then it skipped over to Veneer, and almost all those homes over there were destroyed.
During World War II, the Belleville Shoe Manufacturing Company, America's oldest and largest producer of military footwear, met our armed services needs. After the war, in 1946, Belleville Area College was created to accommodate the educational needs of our returning veterans. And in 1947, the following year, local radio station WIBV began serving the Belleville area. During the early 50s, Belleville had to deal with the post-war baby boom, and soon modern subdivisions sprang up around the city. In 1956, Bellevue Park Plaza Shopping Center opened for business. It was a new concept in shopping and the first major center in the Metro East. The following year, Richland Creek overflowed its banks again, and after a costly mop-up, Belleville finally secured federal assistance to correct this long-standing problem. 1958 was a banner year for Belleville. The old City Hall on South Illinois Street was replaced with the present modern structure. Memorial Hospital opened for service, and Belleville was awarded the 1958 title of Cleanest City in the Nation for its population class. Also, 1958 was the year groundbreaking ceremonies were held for the Shrine of Our Lady of the Snows, now the nation's largest outdoor shrine. Through all the excitement and turmoil of the 60s and 70s, Belleville remained a fairly quiet, conservative community. 2 new high schools were built, Althoff Catholic High School opening in 1964, and Belleville Township High School East in 1966. In 1972, the demolition of the old courthouse became a key issue. After 111 years of service, this building had become too inefficient for county use. So by 1975, this modern courthouse was completed on the same location. This event led the way for the creation of the Historic Preservation Commission. Judy Belleville, vice chairperson of this commission, explains.
I'm standing in the old Belleville Historic District, original Cow Street, which has many buildings dating from 1830 to 1870. of course, built of Belleville brick. Because of Belleville's architectural importance within the state of Illinois, the city of Belleville established an Historic Preservation Commission. And their purpose is to seek out ways to preserve many of these old brick buildings. Original Cow Street is the one intact block we have in our city, and we are enjoying its restoration because of the efforts of many interested citizens who have become interested in the historic district as well.
In 1953, Belleville had a television station, WTVI, located near Edgemont Hill. 2 years later, it moved to St. Louis and became KTVI Channel 2. Belleville would have to wait until 1980 for another television facility when Continental Cablevision began its operations. The cable industry, which was created soon after World War II, has since grown into a major innovation in television communications. The Belleville Veterans Memorial Fountain was constructed in 1937, and by the spring of 1986, major renovations were needed. A beautiful granite crown replaced the aged concrete crown, which was reassembled later in Swansea Park as a planter and continues to serve as a war memorial. Belleville's Jerry Costello, who at the time was chairman of the St. Clair County Board of Supervisors, dedicated the planter. Soon after, this park was renamed Melvin Price Memorial Park in honor of the late Congressman Price, who served the 21st Congressional District for an amazing 22 consecutive terms.
And so the cycle is completed. We began at the public square and followed our county and city's history back to this location. Yes, I believe George Blair was a man of vision, a vision of a beautiful city where a humble farm once existed. But where do we stand today? And what does the future hold for our city?
At the turn of the century, Belleville was an active industrial city. Yet today, few factories remain. Because of substitute fuels, our plentiful coal supply was no longer an advantage, and Prohibition, the Depression, and war years also took their toll on Belleville industries.
The whole economy just changed all around. And it didn't take a century to do it neither. The biggest changes came right after World War II. That's when you could tell it there. That's when the big department stores started coming in and stuff like that. And then later on, why St. Clair Square was developed, and that's put the crimp on downtown stores.
Today, construction is booming all around us. New businesses and subdivisions seem to pop up overnight. And within recent years, the public square has undergone dramatic changes. The First National Bank of Belleville underwent major renovations and later became Magna Bank. And Belleville National Bank became part of Boatman's Bank and now occupies this modern office building. The historic Harrison Imms Mill was demolished in early 1987 to make way for the Richland office complex. And where farmland once existed in Belleville's West End, there now is Westfield Shopping Center. North Illinois Street is becoming one continuous commercial strip, beginning from the public square and extending into Fairview Heights. Change is inevitable, but what does the future hold? Belleville's Mayor Richard Brower discussed plans for our city.
I think in the past year we've seen some things happen in the city of Belleville that certainly have been sad. The main one I can think of is the closing of the Stag Brewery, the last brewery throughout the whole state of Illinois. Stag Brewery closing is certainly a setback for the city of Belleville, loss of some 250, 300 jobs. But then I think you've got to look at the bright side. The relocation of Belleville Shoe Company and going from a firm that hired 325 people to a firm that hired 425 people. Tremendous orders from the military to make boots for the various branches of the military service. We're fortunate in Belleville to be the home of two of the three major stenciling companies in the whole world, Marsh Stencil and Ideal Stencil Company, both located in the city of Belleville, add greatly to the economic benefit of the city of Belleville. There is talk right now of a joint use facility at Scott Air Force Base. I think it's a foregone conclusion that that's going to happen. I don't know how far down the line it'll be, but in a few short years, it's my prediction that we'll see civilian airplanes landing at our Scott Air Force Base. It will be a joint use facility. And that'll open up tremendous possibilities for all of the small communities that surround Scott Air Force Base, including Belleville. The planning of the development of any future development of the city of Belleville is in good hands with our Belleville City Plan Commission. Right now we're upgrading our master plan to include future development, annexations, future transportation needs, and I think that we're right on schedule with our planning, and I don't see any negative effects from the growth of the city of Belleville.
Congressman Jerry Costello, who replaced the late Mel Price, had these further comments on our future.
Belleville has always been a great place to live and work and to raise a family, and I think the future of Belleville is even better. I think that with the possibility of the conversion of Scott Air Force Base from the current base to a joint-use airport, civilian and military, will bring a tremendous amount of jobs to the area and add to the stability of the city of Belleville. I think that with Scott Air Force Base and the possibility of a light rail transit system connecting Lambert Field and Scott Air Force Base, the future can do nothing but grow. And I think that we'll see other businesses coming to Belleville and settling here, creating jobs for our families and for the young people who are here in the area. So I think the future of Belleville is great. We have great leadership, a great community, and I even see a better community in the future.
To some degree, Belleville still holds on to its small-town flavor and German influence, yet our city has had to change with the times. We are now more cosmopolitan and culturally diversified. Will these changes be beneficial, or will we become a city of strangers holding little interest in our common future? A city's good name is as priceless as an individual's reputation. So let us work together to keep Belleville's name true to its meaning, beautiful city.
During this brief span, we've covered much of Belleville's history, but unfortunately, important people, places, and events were omitted due to time constraints. Yet, hopefully, this program has left you with a positive impression of this wonderful and exciting, fascinating city in which we live. I'm Norm Greenberg, and happy 175th birthday, Belleville, you beautiful city.